Okay, well today I'm going to talk to you about Joomla, open source in general, and the power of volunteers, and how it all comes together. And as Steve said, I'm speaking today on behalf of Open Source Matters, and I'm going to discuss a little bit later about what that is and what his role is in the Joomla project, as well as other leadership teams. But before we get to that, what is open source? Many of you in this room are very familiar with it, certainly the folks in the PHP community, and if you're using Joomla for a long time, I'm sure you're very familiar with this concept. But basically, if you're not that familiar, or just for background, open source has two primary principles that we rely on, right? I've got them listed up here. So first, that if you're using open source product, service, software, etc., that you have free access to its underlying architecture or blueprint. So for software developers or software users, that generally means it's source code. So that's the first principle. You have access to the underlying blueprint. The second freedom, or the second feature of open source, is that you have the right to distribute it as you like, and modify it and distribute that also. So those two things essentially characterize most of the open source projects that people are involved in. And Linux is perhaps the most recognizable open source brand. This runs a great many number of the web servers that we all use every day, and many other computers. I believe Linux is the operating system on 95% of the 500 fastest computers on the planet. Woo! Thank you. So it's really a great example of something that was developed to essentially do a cost run around proprietary systems and run on x86 processors, right, as an operating system. And as a result, tons and tons of applications have been written to run on Linux. Mediawiki is over here. This is the software project behind Wikipedia. Essentially, that's like the #2 hit on every Google search I ever do. So most of us, I'm sure, are familiar with Wikipedia. But also, almost everyone in this room, if you have a database-driven website, Drupal or WordPress or Joomla or anything like that, you're probably using MySQL. You're probably running an Apache web server. So all these things are open source, built on open source platforms, including Joomla, which is this tiny little section here. So open source projects are run in various different ways, but they have a lot of things in common. They usually make something, anything, okay, it's called software, and then they give it away essentially for free. So it's very unlike a lot of the business things we do. I'm a business owner also, where you're making something, a product or service, and you're trying to sell it. You're trying to get revenue to keep doing more of what you're doing. So open source projects tend to not have that. They give the product away for free. And in the case of Joomla, we don't even build paid services around what we do. Okay, we don't have a proprietary distribution that we'll come and install for you. We don't sort of sell you expensive service level agreements or contracts. We make it, we give it away, we don't ask anything back, and we just kind of repeat that loop. So is that a successful model? So if you're using Joomla, you might think it is successful. If you're new to Joomla, you might say, oh, I'm not sure yet, I want to know. Well, let's look at some of the stats. Now, what Steve didn't tell you is that I'm the treasurer for Open Source Matters, so I'm not going to give you a long laundry list of budgetary items, but I am going to give you a lot of data about Joomla, okay, to put things in perspective. So the Joomla application itself consists of 477,000 lines of code, plus or minus. Is that accurate today, guys? Is it still accurate? So it's pretty close. It's a lot of code, and you can see that it's grown from its early days when it split from Mambo, and especially with the release of Joomla 3, the code base has really become quite modern, quite complex, and is a very, very, very big undertaking. So who here is familiar with the Joomla configuration file, if we can talk the very basics of code, right? Most of us are. So in comparison, right, everyone is kind of noted. I hope I'm taking the passwords out of this file. If you use Joomla, you've probably seen this file. And if you've used the Joomla global configuration in the Joomla backend, this is what you're editing when you make a change there. This is about 70 lines of code. And it's actually 71 lines, and they're really short lines. So 477,000 represents a massive amount of work. Right? Well, how much work does that represent? And how many people does it take to generate it? Well, if we look at the contributors, and by the way, just a quick note, I've got links at the bottom of most of my slides if you'd like some background on where I'm getting my numbers from, so feel free to follow those, and I'll be happy to publish these slides online later also. So if you look at the contributions, you can see that for much of its history, less than about a dozen people at any one time were contributing to Joomla. And you can see very recently, and I'm really happy to see this, that the contributions in the last few years have skyrocketed. We're getting 30, 40, 50 people a month making contributions to the Joomla core, making more releases, more features, more stability, and more security. Okay? Joomla is a highly active project if you compare it to other open source projects. It's considered highly, highly active. Okay? It's not a code base is not obsolete, and it's not stale. Okay? And these 427 contributors, if you compare them to other open source projects, we do pretty well. Drupal has about 127 contributors, and WordPress has about 50. And there are probably some structural differences in the project that account for that. All three of these projects are enormously successful. Okay? But a point I want to make is that there's something about the Joomla project that really brings in people. Okay? And that's one of the points I want to make to you guys today. Okay? Joomla is a project that lets you contribute as much or as little as you need, and you get out of it what you put in. Okay? Now, if you can calculate the value of all those contributors and all those lines of code, and they have a complicated formula that I'm not going to get into, but basically if you paid $55,000 a year for full-time employees, you would need about 127 person years to generate our 477,000 lines of code, which is about $7 million worth of capital. Okay? So if you today wanted to replicate Joomla from scratch, that's the kind of investment you're looking at. 14 full-time employees for 9 years. Joomla project's 9 years old. If there's any investors, talk to me later, okay? I'm really interested to start another project. In the global community, we do super, super well. And I'm going to show some really exciting numbers that I generated late last night or early this morning that really made me feel positive about where the project's heading. But as of a couple days ago, we had over 52 million downloads. And you can follow this live at this link. So people are downloading Joomla about 10 times every minute of every day, of every hour. And if we look over time, at the download rate, this might surprise some people in this room, especially some of my colleagues who have been talking about how we get more Joomla penetration and making sure it's still popular and it's still out there. If we look from June 2011 to today, or just last month, we see a completely straight line of download usage. We have got a very stable user base who are coming and downloading our software and then making websites with it. Right? That's a huge, huge number and a really solid, dependable trend line in terms of downloads. Joomla is used on about 3% of websites worldwide. And there are almost 1 billion websites by the most recent estimates, so that gives us about 27 million websites in the world. Again, huge, huge numbers, huge usage all around the world. So for every 2 downloads, basically we're getting 1 website. Either someone downloads it by accident, or they already have a copy and they download it again, or they don't use it, they don't like it, they don't publish the website. So 1 in 2 is a pretty good number. And if you look at websites that are only CMS, so if you scan all those billion websites and say which ones we know are using some kind of database-driven dynamic application to serve their content, Joomla represents about 8% of those. Okay? So the market share is very, very respectable. And it's all over the world. You can look at, we track in an ad hoc way the number of governments around the world that use Joomla. And there are currently 3,200 government websites in 204 countries. You can see them on this map. Okay? The entire country of Mongolia uses, if I'm not mistaken, that's the right country that uses their entire infrastructure is based on Joomla. Italy has a massive usage that we know of. If you go to a Joomla day in Italy, you can expect 1,000 to 2,000 people at one of their Joomla days. It's massive there. Okay, followed by Spain, America, Chile, and Mongolia. Okay. And if you are working for a government agency, municipal, state, or federal, or international even, please have a look at joomlagov.info. And if you have permission from your client to submit your site and add it to the database, please take a moment to do that. It helps all of us take a better idea of where we are in the world. But when you also go out and you are telling someone or recommending Joomla, you can say, look at this really great resource. Look at how many places trust our software for their important infrastructure and their governing. Joomla's around the world, and it's been translated in 67 languages. So most of us, when we download Joomla, it comes with a stock US-based language package, but you can install up to 67 languages on Joomla 2.5 and 53 on Joomla 3.x. Okay? This used to be a bit of a tedious process, but my colleagues have been working super hard on the multilingual facets of Joomla. You can now install any language from the back end of your website. If an update comes out, you can update that language package in one click. And if you're installing a Joomla site from scratch using the basic Joomla installer, you can just click the multilingual options and have a fully functional multilingual website in seconds out of the box. This is unheard of in most publishing platforms, okay? This is really a super important characteristic of the software, but that comes from our community, which is highly global, highly international, and cares a lot about internationalization. So I was chatting with my friend Chad over here, hi Chad, about how many languages we had. I wasn't sure and I was a little too lazy to count. I eventually did end up counting, but he said, is there a Klingon? And Brian Tiemann, who most people have heard of in the Joomla community, said that he has one for Joomla 1.0 that's unfinished. So I don't know if that bumps our numbers a little bit, but it really jumps our geek cred like quite high. Now, we don't charge anything for our software. We don't have any expensive services, but we have quite a lot of revenue for a small project. Okay, in 2014, and I know this because I'm the treasurer, I make the budget, we expect revenues of about $765,000. Okay, we had a similar amount in 2013, about $550,000 in 2012. So from a financial point of view, why do we need so much money? You can ask me that question later if you like. We're also doing quite well, okay? And most of that revenue comes from things like advertising. If you've been to the extension site or any of the Joomla properties, you're probably seeing a Joomla ad somewhere. Affiliate revenue, if you sign up for a demo hosting account, for example, a demo site, and you decide to purchase with that hosting provider, we get revenue from that. But also sponsorships from corporate vendors. We don't have a big corporate partner or a big corporate backer, but we do have sponsors who, for folks who want to share our traffic, be associated with our strong brand, but also to sponsor our events where they get to come and promote their products and services, of course. And finally, event ticket sales. Usually you go to a big Joomla event like a World Conference, I'll mention those in a little bit, you can expect to pay $100 or $200, and that's also revenue for the project. So let's recap all these numbers, right? We've got 52 million downloads and counting, 27 million websites, $7 million worth of labor to make the code, $750,000 of annual revenue, 477,000 lines of code, 427 contributors, 3,000 government websites in 200 countries, and 67 languages. So how does all this happen? How do we pull all of this value out of something that we're giving away for free, completely free, okay? Well, there's no corporate, as I said, backer. There's no benevolent dictator or non-benevolent dictator pushing the buttons, controlling what's happening, telling everyone where to go and what to do. It's not how Joomla is structured. Like some other open source projects have iconic leaders, Linus Torvalds, for example, for Linux. We don't have that, okay? We have essentially a group of passionate volunteers around the world. Now, in their day-to-day life, you know, they're putting bread on their table by making websites, selling services, etc. But between coffees, between projects, at lunch, at night, they're doing things for the Joomla project. Okay, this picture is taken at J & Beyond, the International Developers Conference last year. And this is one of my favorite photos. I'm actually down here. You can just see me. And David, you're right here, just so you know. This was a bug squash session, and I was completely lost. It was my first one ever. This was about 1 a.m., and I bugged Dave for about 2 hours to teach me, to help contribute to what was happening here. We were taking a bunch of bugs that existed, people had reported, we're trying to solve them. Some people were testing, some people were fixing bugs, and then the people next to them were testing. And then when we fixed something and enough things were tested, we needed to get it into the core. It needed to be merged or contributed to the core. One of the people who does that is Michael Babkert. Michael, can you put your hand up back there? So Michael was, thank you, that's great. Michael was really sick at the time. Do you remember? You were deathly ill, and he was Skyping from his bed in real time. It was 1 a.m. in Europe. I guess it was about 6 p.m. for you. 5 p.m. And so he was live committing those tested, validated fixes into the code base in real time. It was a super special moment, and I believe we set some bug squashing record at that time, 50 bugs or something like that. So this is what makes the software that we all love and know and use. And when you spend 6 hours in a room and you're up till 4 a.m., or you're Skyping in from across the ocean, you have no choice but to make those relationships and build those friendships with your colleagues, okay? And you don't have to be a programmer. This is my colleague, Paul. Some people here know Paul. He doesn't do much programming, at least when he's at an event, but he's really good at keeping us hydrated, okay? And if you're in a room and you're wondering how you can contribute, this is always a good option if you're at a Joomla event, okay? Now, we've achieved a lot, and it's mostly, as I said, grassroots efforts. Joomla started as a grassroots project from the remains of another project, and it has just grown organically. Okay, but it's not a million different blades of grass trying to do a little bit of something and it all just kind of magically happens. There has to be a little bit of organization. Okay, and I want to spend the second part of my talk talking about that organization. The first comes in the form of user groups. We have 178 official user groups around the world. Okay, and you can see this map here. These are just groups of people that said, we like Joomla, we like to talk about it, we like to share it, and we want to be officially involved. They submit an application, which gets vetted in a kind of a ad hoc process. It's pretty easy to get officially registered. But we know there are tons of places not on this map because either cultural differences or language differences that we haven't overcome. For instance, Mongolia, if their entire government is run by Joomla, you might think there's a couple of users in that country. So that's one of the things we can do better at. But there's a lot of people around the world, obviously, in these user groups. I ran the Milwaukee user group for 4 years myself. And these people run events. This is a graph of how many events are run each year. We run, on average, about 19 or 20 events a year. Okay, this year we're at 6 or 7 for the year. We get a few more towards in the fall, so this I'm pretty confident that we're going to get similar to the last few years. But these events, like today's event, are great places, and I just wanted to give another round of applause, but you guys already realized this is event number 183. Thank you, Atlanta, for hitting 183. That's awesome. It's not a round number, but you got to appreciate the odd ones too. Speaking of events, switch quick aside, I want to give 2 plugs for 2 events. The International Developers Conference is coming up very shortly. It's a little close, but tickets are still reasonable. This is May 30th to June 1st in Germany. This is where probably a dozen people in this room will be there, I know for sure already, but a lot of people from around the world will be there that you've seen, you've heard of, or you'd like to meet. Okay, so I really recommend that. And the World Conference is in November in Mexico. We're reaching out to Latin America in a big way this year. We're trying to push Joomla. Multilingual and multicultural is a part of Joomla's DNA, if you will. And so please join us in November, if you can, in Cancun for a really phenomenal event, okay? This is the event that occurred last year in Boston in November. Okay, so as I said, who does all the work? How does it happen? Okay, essentially, you have people performing all the different roles. It's just that, of course, they don't get paid for it. And we've basically organized into 3 camps, if you will. We have PLT, which stands for the Production Leadership Team. They're mostly in charge of code. We have the CLT, Community Leadership Team. They're in charge of people, mostly, volunteers. And then you have the administrative side called Open Source Matters. Together, these are the 3 leadership teams that try and massage people in the same direction. That's kind of, I think, a pretty accurate description. And I'm going to talk a little about each of these groups, and then we'll finish up. So the PLT, as I said, is all things code. We have this amazing code base. They're responsible for coordinating and merging contributions. Quality assurance is a big item for the folks in the PLT, especially when you have people. Joomla is a project where you can contribute if you want to. But that doesn't mean that the code you contribute is high enough quality or fits the right style to get into the Joomla project, okay? So these folks are the gatekeepers, and for good reason. We don't want it to become a bloated mess. Obviously, we want to keep it high quality and efficient. That's part of their job. They coordinate releases. I'll talk about that a little more in a moment. They set deadlines. They do code sprints. They're really responsible for innovation. We've had a lot of innovation in the Joomla project. A few years back, it was MooTools, responsive design, multilingual out of the box. There's all really great. Now jQuery is coming in, two-factor authentication, tons and tons of really innovative, great features, okay? But it's not just features. There's also things like the framework, which is a platform that you can use to build standalone applications, all based on Joomla and from the Joomla project, okay? So we have 3 representatives here from the PLT today. We have Matt Thomas, who's over here. Hi, Matt. Big hand for Matt. Hey, thank you. Dave Hurley's our community development manager. He's in the back corner. And Michael's up in the corner. Hi again. Come on, more. Let's do it. I wanted to end on Michael because he's going to be talking about Joomla 3.3 beta, which came out 2 days ago or 1 day? 2 days ago. Please give that a try, download it. He's going to talk right after me in room 225, and you're going to learn what all these fancy things mean, because I don't know. He'll tell you at 9:30.
Can I just suggest everyone download, try, and report the issues you find with 3.3 beta?
Absolutely, and if you are not sure where to report them, you can email
Michael.
You can email me. You can email me. I'll have my email at the end. Excellent, thank you. Moving on to the administrative side, Open Source Matters is responsible for the legal and financial side of things. So we do things like licensing. If there needs to be changes to the Joomla license, we handle that. We work with the lawyers and other legal representatives. That also, trademark often follows under copyright and legal boundaries. Trademark and domains go hand in hand. When Joomla first came out, there was kind of a fair bit of abuse of the Joomla trademark and domain names, so that was a big problem for a while. And also contracts. So we have this big budget that I told you about, or quite a nice budget, I would say, but we also have a lot of expenses, and so we need to make sure that we get the contracts done properly, vetted properly, and we don't kind of put our foot in it to say it nicely. Financial, that's my department right now, but it's OSM's responsibility, of course, to worry about budgets, taxes, sponsors, sponsoring things like today's event and other events around the world. Also, things that are coming up from Open Source Matters are certification, so you can perhaps get a certificate and say, I'm a Joomla level expert, 1, 2, 3, etc. And governance models. How do we continue to manage the project in a way that's responsible, but also gives the right amount of power and responsibility between all the interested parties. So this guy, I bring him back up again. Paul Orwig is our outgoing president, and I said earlier that we didn't have a dictator, benevolent or otherwise, and that's true. Paul is the president in that he manages the agenda when we have board meetings, but mostly he's down in the weeds like everybody else, and he's happy to bring us a drink or help in any way he can. So that's a really important distinction, and it's very unique in open source to not have a one specific person kind of calling the shots. It's really unique. And then the community leadership team, as end users, and I know many of you are or you work with end users, this is the area of the project where you interact most with, and you may not realize it, but they manage essentially all the properties on Joomla.org, especially the directories like the extensions directory. Everyone here, who's used the extension directory? Right, like almost everybody. If you don't know, that's where we keep all our software. That's where we organize it all, I should say. And then we have resources directories, user group directories, and those directories were very handy in preparing this talk, I should tell you, because they have lots of data. The community magazine is another really important property we have. It comes out monthly. We have articles contributed only from the community. They're all end user driven. And if you're interested to write an article, a case study, please go on the magazine and submit an article. We have a bug squad, events teams, the forum, which is just massive, all our translators, and all our Joomla documentation. So the CLT, probably in terms of raw volunteers, I don't think there's any doubt that it's super large part of the project. I just wanted to highlight a few of the important ones that I mentioned. This is the extensions directory you've all mentioned. Currently we have 7,805 add-ons for Joomla 2.5 and 3. If you added in the Joomla 1.5 extensions, which are no longer listed because that version is not supported anymore, we'd probably be at 12,000 or 13,000. So tons and tons of extensions. And this was probably Joomla's earliest one of the important ways that Joomla became popular, there were always a lot of extensions for Joomla. The community magazine that I mentioned, again, this is the most recent issue. It's available in 2 languages. I'm told French is coming out soon. If you want to contribute, especially if you have some extra language skills, please contact me. Any questions or things you have at the end of this talk, please just send them to me and I'll make sure they get to the right person. And our forum is our busiest property. This is where, who's been on the Joomla forum to ask a question? I have been there so much, right? Who's been there to answer a question? Hey. That's like 8 or so, great. If you think that you don't have anything to offer Joomla, just go to the forum because I guarantee you there are people there who can benefit from your experience. No matter if you're a Joomla person, a PHP person, there is something you can contribute here. Design, marketing, all kinds of stuff. We have almost 3 million posts. I mean, I think this has to be one of the biggest forums on the internet. Almost 700,000 topics and over 600,000 members in that forum. It is a massive property and a big piece of infrastructure. Now, it seems like that we have these PLT, CLT, OSM silos, and certainly to some extent that's true. But what I'm seeing more and more, especially the last few years, as we've had this increase in contributions at the code level, we've had more and more interaction between these teams. So for example, user groups and the extensions directory, OSM and CLT basically have to work together to make sure that those things work right. So for example, a user group, if they're abusing the trademark, then they can't be an official user group. They have to clear up, those problems first before they can be an official group. And that clearance comes from OSM, but the user groups in general are managed by CLT. So they collaborate on that. Bugs and translation, mostly it's community members, but PLT are the gatekeepers. They're the ones who help put all that code in. So they have to work together. Other things like events are multidisciplinary. They have people from all teams organizing events. Not just, say, just OSM or just CLT. And the budget, of course, we couldn't do it if everyone didn't get together. And I see the guys giving me some evil eyes over there for this last year's budget process. But we all have to work together to make sure that happens. So I feel like more, especially recently, even though we have our silos, that we're moving together in a better way than we have in the past. We're doing more and more collaboration, which is great to see. We do have challenges. It's not all roses and sunshine, of course. The Joomla project is 100% volunteer. It is decentralized, and there's no leader. So it's really hard to pick someone and say, you did great, we're going to give you a raise. A raise in the Joomla world means you get more work. But it also means when we have somebody who is doing harm in the project, or somebody who got too busy and can't contribute the way they were and can't meet their responsibilities, we have trouble moving them down the escalator and saying, okay, we need to get someone else to fill that role for now. So that's one of the things we struggle with as an all-volunteer, decentralized organization. We're a bit of a behemoth in terms of how fast we can move. So the former president of OSM, Ryan Ozimek, was keen of saying that Joomla was like a big ship. It took a long time to turn it around. And in many ways, that's true. Especially when you move into things like licensing and legal and financial, these decisions can take much, much longer than would be acceptable in a kind of a standard corporate environment, for example. And of course, communication with so many people in so many different time zones, with so many different channels. I mean, between mailing lists and regular email and phones and Skype and HipChat and everything else, and it's like a wave of communication. Rod Martin, who was just elected to our board of Open Source Matters here, I'm sure is feeling this wave very intensely since he joined a few days back. We also have version support issues. We have 27 million plus websites. About half of them are still on Joomla 1.5. Probably, I don't want to pull a number out of the air because I don't know, but probably lots of these people don't even know that Joomla 2.5 exists, or that they might have a security vulnerability that was patched with a hot patch recently. So that's a big problem for us. This is a non-supported, this is an end-of-life piece of software. We don't support that old version officially. But we have all those users. How do we communicate with them? How do we get them to upgrade their sites to more modern versions, safer versions, better versions, right? So that's a big challenge for us. But despite that, we kind of go back to where we started. Okay, we make a product. It's called Joomla. It's a great publishing platform. We give it away for free, and we don't charge any services. Okay, so in the end of the day, what do we have? Do we have just a product? Do we have just a piece of code that somebody could sell for however many dollars? Well, I would argue no, that's not what we have. Because of our unique structure and our lack of any centralized overruling power, I think what we've done is we've converted all of this energy, and the value we get out of it is not this piece of software, but it's actually a really great tight community that can push this project forward and work together. And so that's the message I want to end on. When you go back to your offices and you go back to your colleagues or your potential clients or people who are using your software, let them know and let your teams know that this project is all about the community and the people in it and their ability to come together and work towards a common purpose. Thank you very much for your time.